Hey, solopreneurs, Gabe here. Today we have Gordon Firemark of Firemark Enterprises. He's called the podcast lawyer. Now, he does all kinds of other things that I think you're going to find some interest in. And he is going to share his tips on how to get legit and go pro. I think you're going to love this conversation. So please give it a listen. Gordon, thank you for being on the podcast.
It's great to be here, Gabe. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I thought it'd be great to have you on for this coaching series and bring you in and share your insights and expertise on your topic of what we would call get legit, go pro, and how to achieve the things that professionals do by doing the things that professionals do. But before we do that, I want to hear your story. I want to hear, anybody that sees this on video or anybody that hears the intro, Gordon, you're called the podcast lawyer, and there's all kinds of ways we can go with this, but I'm really curious,
Yeah.
how did you become the podcast lawyer? How did it end up that now we're talking on the podcast?
Well, the podcast lawyer is actually sort of an evolution of my practice as an entertainment lawyer, and I got into podcasting. I'll get there. I'll get to that in a minute. And so I've started branding myself that way, and that's been really successful for me. Thank the Lord. So, but I got interested in the entertainment side of things at a very young age. I was in kindergarten. I was 5 years old. We lived outside Boston, Massachusetts, and I was in a K through 12 school where the high school kids were doing their production of Oliver. This must have been 1971 or so, so it was a fairly new show at the time. Anyway, they're doing this production of Oliver. They bring the kindergartner kids in to watch a dress rehearsal, and they sat us down and taught us to, be quiet and clap with the appropriate times and all that. And then the lights go down, the curtains go up, stage lights come on, and I was hooked. I was drawn in, mesmerized by that experience, to the point that I went home that night and I was telling my parents, I want to see plays. I want you to take me to shows. And they were theater goers, so they were excited about that, and that was great. And so, as a family, we started going to theater with some frequency. Cut to a few years later, we've moved across the country. My dad's job brought us across to California, and theater was not as easily accessible. But I started getting into some low grade trouble with my friends in middle school. Going into construction sites and messing around and silly stuff like that. And somehow the school principal, I remember very fondly, Jerry Evans, got a hold of me and said, I want you to run the lights and sound for the school variety show. So pulls me back into theater, and it that hooked me again. And I did that kind of stuff into high school. And while I was in high school, I got a job. Our community opened up a new professional community theater, and I got a job working there as a stagehand and sound technician. And that was sort of it. I started college as a theater major, but that was more for the actors and not the back behind the scenes kind of guys. So I switched around a little bit, ended up in radio, television, and film. And I was only in my senior year in college that a professor pulled me aside and said she had noticed an aptitude. I was taking one of the graduate level classes on government regulation of media, and she'd noticed an aptitude for the legal and managerial level stuff. And she said, "You should think about going to law school." And I laughed. I thought that was the funniest thing. I was going to go to film school. I was going to be a filmmaker. But I thought about it for a while, and as long as I was taking tests for grad school, I thought, why not? I'll take the LSAT. And I got into law school. I didn't get into grad school for film. So I decided not to do it right away. I came back to Los Angeles from Oregon, where I was in college, and began working in television, mostly doing live events and sports coverage and public affairs kind of stuff. And I was an associate producer. I had a crew and a truck, and we would go out and do our events every week. And um, it was an exciting and fast-paced thing, but I really wanted to be in the entertainment world, movies and television, entertainment media, and there just wasn't much going on. I ended up getting ready to leave just as the Writers Guild went on strike, and so there was going to be no work in entertainment, and that was when I made the decision to go to law school. And once I was in law school, it was like a freight train running down the tracks, and you're just trying to stay ahead of it all. But it was always going to be entertainment law. That was always going to be the part of my practice. So when I got out into the world and started practicing, Um, Entertainment and media was a thing, and then when podcasting came along, I said, "Oh, this is fun. This is for me. I get to play with all those microphones and toys that I used to love playing with." And here it is. So I think that at first it was, God, I don't want to work that hard, you know, and I don't think of myself. I never thought of myself as being a lawyer. I was one of those guys who always I could argue anything to death. And as soon as I started telling my family and my friends, they said, "Of course," but it was not something that I envisioned for myself at all, being a lawyer and practicing law. I always sort of figured I'd be hands on, up to my elbows in gear and creative production kinds of stuff. So it was definitely a big turn.
Interesting. Did you have you maintained some connection to theater? Have you maintained?
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
Well, theater is a good chunk of my practice as well. The podcast lawyer, but I do work with producers and authors of plays that are going to various stages on the way to Broadway and the West End and world tours and things like that. It's a lot of fun. But I was working as a sound technician at that same theater that I started at as a kid up until just a couple of years ago. Just sort of keeping my hand in and keeping that energy alive in me. And I had kids and moved farther away from there, and it just got harder and harder. So I'm no longer doing that. But definitely need to get the smell of the theater into my nostrils every once in a while. That backstage has a unique, distinct. Anybody who's been there knows that backstage smell. So it's a drug for me.
Interesting. Very interesting. So let's back up a little bit. You started your practice. What was it that caused you to? I mean, so you finished law school. Did you go to work for a big firm and start to get experience, or did you go start your own? I mean, what was that? What happened there?
I started at a small firm right out of law school, an entertainment litigation boutique firm, and it wasn't really what I wanted to be doing. While I was in school, I had worked at a couple of the big movie studios and one of the animation studios, and really liked being in that in-house corporate environment. Just helping with the strategies and making things happen. But I was in law school in the late '80s, early '90s, and you may remember, those who are old enough will remember, there was a TV show on in those days called LA Law, and it made lawyering look really, really sexy. And that meant that there was a glut of law students. And we all graduated from law school in those couple of years into an environment where law firms were consolidating and downsizing. So there were no jobs in the law firm environment. And that also trickled over into the corporate in house environment where folks were losing jobs, not getting jobs. There just wasn't a lot of new entry level stuff going on. So I ended up taking a job that was being vacated by a friend of mine from law school, who got to pick his successor basically, and it was a great job working in this litigation firm. But litigation was just not what I wanted to be doing. Um, I can get as adversarial as the next of them, but I don't like myself much when I'm in that mode. And so I stayed in that job for about 6 or 7 months before I realized it wasn't for me. Um, Things weren't going well in the firm either. Finances were weird and paychecks bouncing and things. So it was time to go. And I didn't really have anywhere else to land. So I went solo fairly early on in my law career. I was about less than a year out of law school at the time.
Wow. What was uh what was that like? I mean, what were the challenges you were facing, and where was your mind space when you went from, okay, this isn't going good, I'm going to go start my own firm? Did you know what you were doing, or did you just wing it like the rest of us did when we all started our firms? I mean,
I was freaking out. It was definitely, the sense of working without a net,
mhm.
right? It was hit or miss and sink or swim is really. Fortunately, I had my grandfather had been a merchant. He owned his own store, a drugstore. My dad was a physician and he was in a private practice. So I had some role models who had run their own businesses and made a go of it, and I could see that it was doable, and that was the mindset. Yes, you can do this. But I'll tell you that first few years, I was applying for every job I could find and looking to, to find a place to land, either in that in-house environment or the right kind of law firm. And I'm going to thank my lucky stars that it never materialized. I never got that job because my practice has grown and developed into something I really enjoy, and I get to pick and the best thing about it is I get to pick and choose who I work with. I only work with people I like, um, and and causes I believe in, and that kind of thing. So it's really it's really been great. But it has been working without a net the whole time. So you just have to get used to that sense of peril on either side, as long as you just have to stay in balance. So
Yeah, it's amazing how many people that I talk to, especially on this podcast, because speak mostly with solopreneurs. They're sharing their stories with other solopreneurs, and it's amazing how many of us have those same stories of we're working without a net. And it's interesting. I can still remember 20 plus years ago, I was at an event and I was chatting with these a couple of army recruiters, and I was, looking to hire somebody, and I was talking to a couple of army recruiters, and the guy looks at me and he says, "So, what's your salary?" I said, "There's no salary." I said,
right.
"You either make it or you don't." He's like, "Dude, I don't know how you do that. I honestly can't figure that out." I'm like, "Well, some of us are cut out to do it, and some of us are not cut out to do it." And there's a lot of people who can, but they can't get their mind around the fact of, like you just said, working without a net.
Yeah, yeah, the salary is what's left at the end of the month, really. And, the trick is making sure there's something left at the end of the month. And, I mean, that's the trick we all have to do in all of our personal as well as business finances, of course. But, yeah, it's very scary, especially when you're just starting out and you've got the student loans to repay, and then, you life transitions, and now you have a mortgage and children to feed, clothe, and shelter, and there's always something. But to a certain extent, it's a mindset. You just have to have the can-do attitude um, and a little, I guess, faith that things are going to work out the way they're meant to work out, and that that there's something guiding you. I'm not a particularly spiritual guy, but it's definitely there's been something nudging me in the right direction when I needed it.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. So tell me about your practice now. What does your practice focus on now, or do you have little subsections that you specialize in? Uh,
Yeah. I have sort of 4 areas of law that I work in. The podcast law stuff is fun, it's exciting, it's interesting to me. Most podcasters, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of podcasters are the independent hobbyist do-it-yourselfer, and they don't have a budget to hire expensive lawyers to do the done-for-you legal work for them. So, for those folks, I have actually, also created a I don't call it a side business, a parallel business that is online training and templates and forms and sort of for the do-it-yourselfer, to give them the instruction and the materials they need to get things done for themselves. And we can talk a little more about that later. But my practice is the digital media side, folks who are making a business of their podcasting, YouTube, TikTok, you name it, and helping them with the legal issues that come up in there. It's all transactional work, so licensing and permissions and making sure you have the rights and analyzing whether there's a liability risk or those kinds of things. I do the same kind of work for film producers and television producers. In the film side, we also, of course, have to help them with raising the financing for their projects, structuring, setting up their business entities, what we call single purpose entities for productions and things like that, and all of the various relationships that are involved in making of a film, which tends to be a short-term business enterprise with a large volume of dollars moving through it very quickly. Um, and then I also do some work in as I said earlier in the theater, which is the similar thing: financing, production, relationships, and business structures. But it's a very different business, and so that's one of the things that sets me a little apart from many of the other entertainment lawyers is that I understand the theater business and the film business, and I can manage the how those two both overlap and don't overlap. And so clients that are dabbling in multiple areas really appreciate that.
that's great. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I always like to understand how people's businesses are put together and how
Mhm.
things work. So that's very interesting. So let's make that transition to the get legit to go pro, do the things that professionals do. What can you share there with us?
Well, after practicing law for nearly 30 years, I have really been able to see the folks in my client base and the folks that I work with who have succeeded. And I've also seen the ones that haven't. And I've been able to identify some of the things that distinguish those two groups. The ones that have succeeded tend to be the ones who, as I like to say, get legit so they can go pro. And for me, what that means is there's sort of a three-part model to this. And the first step of it is to think legit. It's in the mind. I've talked about mindset already a couple times. It's about having an attitude of professionalism, of seeing yourself, visualizing yourself in the role of a professional at whatever it is you do, whether it's a creative trade or a business or even if it's just a hobby, like podcasting for many people, they view it as a hobby. But if they want to really make it sing, they they take this professional mindset about it, and um, and they yeah they think legit. The next step is planning, and I say think legit, plan legit. Planning legit means having a plan, developing a plan, and it's not so much about the plan itself, but the act of planning, the sitting down and thinking it through again, forward looking, visualizing what's coming in the future, anticipating some of the roadblocks and the where you're going to need to navigate around hurdles and things like that. Because it's so much easier to plan things out ahead of time and then follow a plan than it is to wake up every morning and say, okay, what am I going to do today? And so thinking legit, having that plan, and then really it comes down to behaving legit, acting like a professional, you know, doing as professionals do. And to a certain extent, this is people will say this is sort of putting the cart before the horse, but I think this is actually the horse. The behavior is what drives the success. And I follow a guy who talks about the be, do, have approach to things. So many people come into the anything, they set a goal, they have an aspiration, and they say, well, as soon as I have this thing or this much money or this many clients or whatever, then I will do the things that professionals do so I can be a professional. That's backwards. The key is to be professional from the get-go, so you and do the things that you need to do, that professionals do, so you can have what professionals have. So I always say, yeah, get that horse out in front of the cart and think legit, plan legit, and behave legit. And that means the behave legit means having structures and systems and strategies in place ahead of time. It's part of that plan, but it's also part of being set up correctly. And that means having your business structured, whether it's forming a corporation or an LLC or a partnership agreement with your colleague or whatever it is. Having your team structure set up. If you've got people working in your business, and we shouldn't try to wear all the hats and do it all ourselves. It's this is me, do as I say, not as I do, mostly. But uh, having people who are good at the thing they need to be good at helping you is essential. You can't be great at everything in your business. And so having a team but having that team means you have to have those structures in place, the relationships. In the podcasting world, I refer to it as a podcast prenup. You should have an agreement with everybody involved that outlines who owns what, who's responsible for what, how they get paid or not paid, whatever. And it should be very clear because those intentions will really guide ownership and how disputes get resolved and those kinds of things. Likewise, you should have systems and strategies in place for your property, especially the intellectual property, which can be a little tricky. And ultimately, you have to have systems in place for how you're going to work with your clients and customers. However, you're going to make your money, you got to have that figured out and be ready to strike when the iron is hot. To capture the relationship with that client so you can monetize what you're doing. And so that's it, is think legit, plan legit, be legit, and have these structures and systems in place.
Very interesting. I like how, and I say this word and I don't mean it the way it's going to sound. I like how simple it is.
Yeah,
It is think legit, plan legit, and then behave legit. And there's so many takeaways from that. And I
yeah,
like how you then explained systems in place, the thinking in place, the strategies. And it's amazing. I've got a team,
yeah.
and my team, I've got Christina, my executive assistant. I got Vicky, who is my what I would call my office uh, back, back office support, and then we've
Mhm.
also got the podcast people, the marketing people, the everything. And it's amazing how the systems continuously are the thing that's on my radar. All
Mhm.
right, we had a breakdown here. This needs to be fixed. We had a breakdown here. This needs to be fixed. And it's that systems that we have to constantly be working on. I would bet that's something that you see often.
Yeah. One of the things I think entrepreneurs have a hard time with is they want to be in there doing the stuff. But what the sign of a real successful entrepreneur, I think, is being able to step back and focus on the bigger picture and just tweak things here and there by telling the member of the team responsible for that area, hey, this is what needs to be fixed, and then trusting them to get it done themselves rather than micromanaging each little part of the process. It's one of the things I have a real hard time with is letting go of that micromanaging side of it. But I think it is essential to taking things to the next level and scaling a business.
Oh, I would agree. And that trust is so huge. If
Mhm.
you can trust and delegate and trust that they're going to actually get it done,
Yeah.
it's amazing the quality. And they generally do it better than you do, anyways. That's the crazy thing.
Right. But again, it's that leap of faith that you have to take that it's going to work out okay. And people will make mistakes, and you also have to have faith that the mistakes aren't going to be devastating, and they'll find the workarounds. That's how we learn. That's how we refine our systems.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Anything else you want to share regarding the GoPro, Get Legit to GoPro?
Well, this Get Legit GoPro framework that I have is part of my marketing and promotion for a product that I have called Easy Legal for Podcasters. It's that do-it-yourself training and templates program, but it really does apply to pretty much any kind of a business. And so I'm no, I think that's it. I just the program is called Easy Legal for Podcasters, and if you're a podcaster and you haven't already gotten all your legal stuff taken care of, this is a great way to do it if you are the do-it-yourself type.
Oh, fantastic. So, this is a podcast about money.
Yeah.
And when this podcast about money, throughout the podcast, I like to ask a few different questions of people, and there's three questions that I ask everybody.
Mhm.
And the first one is what is the smartest thing you've ever done regarding money as a solopreneur? And tell me that story.
I would say I think the smartest thing I've ever done was letting go a little bit, being willing to spend money in order to make money, treating money as a resource, as a tool, uh, and really accepting that it's not a finite resource. Treating it as a flow. It's the river flowing by, and when you need it, you scoop up some and you use it for what it needs to be used for. So often, and I found I'd say the first half of my professional career was holding on tightly. Oh gosh, I don't know if I can afford this because I've got to pay the bills this month or whatever. When I was finally able to release that insecurity about money, I noticed that the flow started really moving more quickly. It wasn't stagnant. So yeah, letting go and accepting that money has to go out as it comes in. And
Mhm.
just I'd say that was my biggest mindset shift.
Yeah. Tell me, was there a point in your business that you either made the mindset shift, or did the finances hit a certain spot and you're like, okay, I can do this now? Because there's that piece. I think about that with my practice. That when I started really, like you said, letting go and investing in people to then help really do this well, it's amazing. It just keeps getting better and better every single year. I'm curious did you notice that, or was it the mindset shift, the investment, and then it came? How did it work for you?
A little of both, I would say. I think around the 10-year mark. So it was 10 years I was in business before I got to that feeling where I could wake up every day saying, "Okay, I'm okay. Everything's going all right. Cash flow is real. It's there." There are always ups and downs, but um, that's a long time to be working at a business and plugging away and not knowing if you're going to cover your bills the next month. And then sudden, it was fairly sudden. Around that 10-year mark, I was able to say, "Okay, it's real. I got this." Um, but it was later that I really the mindset shifted to the idea of it as a flowing resource. And I think I was studying with an online business entrepreneurial guru who was talking about this. A lot of what I've talked about today is sort of derived from his teaching, and um, yeah, that sense of abundance that a lot of people talk about the law of attraction. I'm not sure I buy into quite the woo woo level of that stuff, but there's definitely, if you feel abundant, abundance will find you. And yeah, that shift was a little later, and that's when I felt started feeling more comfortable making investment in my business, in myself, and frankly, just in my relaxation and pleasure as well. Um, that I started to say, okay, there's plenty. It's going to keep coming. I'm not going to worry about it. And once you let go of that worry, then it really starts to flow. And what felt like a little trickle 30 years ago, it's a cascading waterfall nowadays. It really feels that way to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's fantastic. I think everybody listening is either has already found that point or is waiting for that point, because you're like you said, it was 10 years. 10 years of going hard and going, all right, is this going to be all right? Is this going to be all right?
Yeah.
It's an interesting, yeah.
But I think if you can get the mindset there sooner, you can save yourself probably 7 or 8 of those years, visualizing that waterfall. And I do really use that visualization, that money and finances is a waterfall of resource that is available to me whenever I need it. And if I can visualize that, try to sit with that visual of every day, or for a minute or two, it really helps. And uh, yeah, I won't say there are no money worries anymore, but there are different money worries nowadays.
Yes. Yeah. That has a tendency to happen when the complexities and the success then leads to complexities, which
Yeah,
changes the worries, which is what happens. So
yeah.
very interesting. Yeah.
Nowadays, it's about being a good steward of the money so that it's put to good use and well used, and that there's something left over for the people I care about later on.
Yeah. I love it. How about the other side? What's the biggest money mistake you've made as a solopreneur? What is that story?
I would say, um, investing in the trappings of success instead of the tools of success. Um, it's very easy, especially in entertainment law. You got to drive a nice car, you got to have a nice house, you got to wear the nice suits, all that kind of stuff. And the truth of it is, very little of that really matters. There's some you have to maintain a certain image, but yeah, I would say the big mistake was overdoing it in that arena and getting leveraged too much debt in order to support that kind of a lifestyle before the finances were flowing in that river that I was talking about that would allow me to service that debt. And so, yeah, accumulating lots of debt was a big problem for me.
Hmm. And that's quite normal, especially when you have to try to, like you were saying, almost fake it till you make it is what you would kind of be saying. But I mean, all right, I'm going to invest in this and I'm going to spend this money. I'm going to go into debt, but almost fake it till you make it.
And then I was spending so much energy and attention and focus on just keeping my head above water that I wasn't really getting anywhere. And yeah, it was just either mixing metaphors now, of a hole to dig out of, rather than uh, building a foundation for things in the future.
Hmm. Yeah, very interesting. It reminds me of a story, and I'll use this from your kind of your entertainment law world. and talking about having to have the, the right car, the outfits, etc. I remember hearing the story of Megan Trainor, the artist, and
Mhm.
when she had like her first big contract, the big thing she wanted to go get was she wanted to go get the white Range Rover because all the other artists and writers had the white
Mhm.
Range Rover. I remember hearing that story.
It's a very common story. Yeah. And there's lots of stories of famous it seems to happen more in the recording artist business than anywhere else because the nature of that business, up until fairly recently, the record company was really more like a lender than a manufacturing business in a lot of ways, and so the artists would be leveraged to their own record company, with advances they'd receive, and sure enough, they'd go and spend these giant amounts of money on limos and living high on the hog, and then the record wouldn't do well, and they'd be in debt, and they'd have to put out another album to try to cover it, and then they'd, "Oh, we released the next album, we've gotta show off again and ride around in limos," and they didn't realize they were paying for it all themselves, basically, with their futures, and so you had bands that were multi-platinum hit album, bands, declaring bankruptcy because they just got out of control, so debt is dangerous. It's a tool, but it's dangerous.
Yes, it can be. Actually, I just did a video that was just shared regarding that, the 5 money myths that you've been told are true, but they're not quite true. And one of them was debt is not bad. You have to manage that debt,
Mhm.
but debt is not bad. It's a tool. You said it perfectly.
Yeah.
So the last question regarding money is what does mastering your finances mean to you?
Mastering my finances for me has meant A, eliminating as much debt as possible. As you said earlier, there is debt that can be useful as a tool, and we shouldn't be, totally focused on only a cash lifestyle, I think. But definitely living mostly on a cash basis. If I don't have the money for something, I'm not going to buy it on credit unless I'm sure I can pay it off very, very quickly. That's sort of my approach. Mastering my finances meant A, knowing my numbers, um, eliminating that debt, and living within my means, really, and planning legit. Having a plan for the future is a big part of that as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I appreciate it, which then gives you the freedom to make decisions, to make choices,
Mhm.
and also the freedom from that stress of, like you said, you were trying to always keep your head maybe above water, or always fighting to stay above that debt pool.
Gabe, if I can, I've got a story about this that has just happened in this last year for me. I had two floods here in the house since January of this year. January, it was in this space, my office, and it was a very minor thing. The insurance was going to take care of it, and it was an opportunity for me to redecorate the office as well with the panels on the back wall and that kind of stuff. And that involved, some expense that I hadn't anticipated or planned for, but I had some money in the bank. I was able to do it because I had my finances under control, and I had insurance to cover the bulk of the renovation cost. Then, as soon as the day after this project was finished, we had a problem in our kitchen. And we have hardwood floors on the whole downstairs of our house. The flood in the kitchen ruined the hardwood floors, ruined the walls. Then we had to have cabinets ripped out and the whole thing. Turned out to be a very, very big, almost six-figure project to renovate our kitchen and put it just back to where it had been. And talking about it, we decided we had some other things we wanted to do. And it meant we were gonna be living in a hotel for a month or so. It meant, paying extra for premium countertops and cabinetry and those kinds of things. And, because I had gotten my finances under control, I felt like I was able to cover the expense of all that. Insurance was gonna reimburse me eventually for some of it, but I was able to cover all that expense without having to take a second mortgage on the house or anything like that, which is what most people, I think, would have to do in that scenario. We had some cash on hand. I had the cash flow to cover things, and just having no kitchen for it was actually 4 months with no kitchen, eating out 3 meals a day for 4 months. You want to talk about a significant expense? When I went back and looked at it and realized I've covered this for the last 4 months, I was stunned. It made me wonder where the money goes when we're not spending it on those kinds of things. But um, I'm blessed and fortunate to have been able to do that, and I credit that to knowing my numbers and keeping an eye on things.
That's fantastic. That is a fantastic story. And your mind went where my mind went when you said, I kind of wonder where that money went when I'm not doing that. That was the first thing I thought. I'm like, well, if you can do that, well, there should be some other things that you should be able to do as well, which is interesting. So,
Well, I'll say the COVID quarantine is part of it too, because we haven't been out, going to theater and going to movies and spending on the things we sort of ordinarily would have spent on. But that's been a lesson too. Is if you take a look at how your spending has changed, um, there's good information in there if we're willing to mine for it.
yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your money questions, and I appreciate you sharing the mastery of finances. And that story was great. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I just would say as a little bit of advice, and I actually just made a podcast episode about this myself yesterday. It's the little things, small steps repeated over time consistently can have a huge, huge impact. So if you are listening to, hey, this is a money podcast. If you are um, looking to get a handle on your money, it's okay to start small. You don't have to take a giant sum of money and put it in a cash management account or something like crazy, something right away. Start with a little bit. Separate that money, put it over there somewhere, and just chip away at the debt and accumulate a little bit over time. I mean, after all, the Grand Canyon, it was a trickle of water that cut that giant canyon into the stone. And if you've got debt, you can do that. If you want to build something for yourself, start with a little bit and just be consistent about taking those steps every single day, week, month, year. And pretty soon you'll start to see real progress.
Perfect. Absolutely love that. So, how can my listeners find you? If anybody's interested in reaching out to you, how can they find you?
Well, my name, I'm fortunate that I have a very distinctive name. So GordonFiremark.com is a great way to find me. That's sort of a hub, a clearinghouse for a lot of the stuff that I do. My law practice is at firemark.com. And um, you can always search for the podcast lawyer as well. Any of those will find me.
Fantastic. And is there, I think you've got a couple little things that someone could actually take advantage of. If they're a podcaster, you might have a release. And I think there was something else that you had available. What were those two things?
Well, if you are a podcaster and this is sort of a crusade of mine, actually, Gabe, thank you for asking. If you're a podcaster and you have guests on your show, it is very, very important that you have formal consent from your guests. And so I really encourage folks to use a guest release, and I offer one for free. Well, you give me your email address, you get it from me. I don't charge you any money. If you go to podcastrelease.com, you can get a copy of this template for a release, and you can use it as an online form or use an e-signature system or whatever you want to do. But it's a great way to get that consent. It becomes irrevocable, and it clarifies all the issues about using the material that you get in these recordings. And I signed one with you, Gabe, when we decided to do this recording, and it's essential.
Mhm.
And if you're an entrepreneur or digital business of some sort, I have a free resource for you as well. It is a little ebook called Five Legal Steps for Getting Your Business Together, your online business. And it's at fivelegalsteps.com.
All right, Gordon, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing your tips on getting legit to go pro. What were those three again, if you don't mind sharing?
You got to think legit, you got to plan legit, and you got to behave like a legit professional.
Absolutely love it. Thank you for being on the podcast, Gordon.
Gabe, it's been so much fun. Thanks for having me.
Well, solopreneurs, I hope you enjoyed that conversation that Gordon and I had together regarding how to get legit to go pro. The three things you got to remember is you got to think legit, you got to plan legit, and then most of all, you need to behave legit. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please share this with a friend and help this podcast keep growing. Have a great day.